It's the middle of winter and I'm still pulling things out of the ground, believe it or not. Namely, Jerusalem artichokes, or they're also known as sunchokes. So if you want to harvest some with me today, today is the day. And in this video, I'm going to share with you when you can tell is the best time for you to start digging up your Jerusalem artichokes, and also the best method that I have found thus far to dig them up. Welcome to True Freedom Permaculture, where I show you all the tips and tricks you need to have a green thumb, even if you weren't born with one. Let's head out to the garden. First, how do you know when it's time to harvest your Jerusalem artichokes? Well, first of all, you're going to notice that the plant itself, the leaves are going to start dying and the plant's going to turn from green to brown. Now, you don't want to pull up the artichokes too early. For example, when the yellow flowers are blooming, because the tubers won't be fully developed and you're not going to get as many or as big of Jerusalem artichokes as you normally would. So it's actually better to wait until after your first frost or even multiple frosts. So at this point in my garden, there have been multiple frosts and it's fine. You just don't want to wait too late, and by that I mean you don't want to be in deep winter, because if the ground is totally frozen, it's going to be impossible to dig up the artichokes at that point. Another tip is to watch the weather. So if you had a lot of rainy days in a row, the ground is going to be really muddy. So I waited until I had a stretch of dry days. That way the Jerusalem artichokes are much easier to pull out of the ground and you're going to have less cleaning to do. You can still see that when I pull up the artichokes, the ground was partially frozen, so it was a little bit muddier than it would be normally. But like I said, I think it will help you if you have a stretch of dry days before trying to take these out of the ground. All right, what do you need to dig up these suckers? Well, it's really simple. All you need is a garden fork. I have found that works much better than a shovel, because if you have very clay, muddy soil, or if it's partially frozen, you're just going to have a much easier time with a garden fork. Even if you don't have a large garden fork, you can use one of those smaller forks and that's going to work well too. It might be a little trickier, but it can still work. Optional are gloves, because again, if you have muddy soil or frozen, partially frozen soil, you might want to wear gloves. For me personally, I think it's good for you to get a little muddy sometimes, so I don't mind using my bare hands, but you do you. As far as the stalks of the Jerusalem artichokes, some people like to cut those back all the way. Personally, I believe that they are an asset to you in that you can use them to kind of pry up the soil, and a lot of times the rhizomes will be attached, the Jerusalem artichokes will be attached to it. So I think that they can kind of help you get some leverage to get them out of the ground. So if it were me, I would not cut them back entirely. If you want to cut them back partially, that's fine, but I would use some of the stalk. I would leave some of the stalk so that it can help you get them out. You can see it's quite a simple process. All I'm doing is I'm using my garden fork to slowly pry up the soil very gently, and then that will allow the soil to be loose enough for me to dig the Jerusalem artichokes out. And I am also trying to knock off as much dirt as I can with my hands and just kind of prying clumps of dirt off. Again, if you have drier soil at the time, this will be a lot easier for you, but that way you're not bringing all that mud into your home, and it's just going to make the cleaning process shorter, because that is one thing about Jerusalem artichokes, is that they take multiple washings in my experience. So the more that you can do outside and the easier you can make it for yourself, the better. Also, when you are putting the garden fork into the ground, try not to do it too close to the stalk. That's another good reason for leaving a good portion of the stalk intact before you do this. It serves as a marker, because if you put the fork in too close, there's a good chance you're going to damage a lot of the artichokes that are in the ground. So I try to aim for at least a foot or so away from the stem if possible. Sometimes if they're growing in clusters, it's a little more difficult to do, but that way you won't damage as many of the artichokes. I still can't believe how many I got and how large they were, and this all came from just a few plants. Hold on, I'm not done. There's one final step, which is that I'm giving back to the earth a little bit because it has provided so much for me in the form of these beautiful Jerusalem artichokes that I really want to take care of it so that in the following spring it can provide more and again and again. So I'm adding a mulch layer to this by simply using a chop and drop mulching method. I'm just using a pair of garden shears to cut up the dead Jerusalem artichoke stalks and foliage, and it'll provide a really nice layer to cover the ground to keep it insulated and keep the moisture in during the winter. I'm so glad I'm going to have a large supply of these around so that I can use them whenever I feel like cooking some up. And it's nice to know that I still have food growing even when a lot of the food has already been dug up for the year. So if your Jerusalem artichokes are ready to be harvested, there's a good chance that right now is a wonderful time to reflect on your garden and start planning for the upcoming growing season because it's most likely the quieter season. So if that interests you, I will put up a video right now that will guide you as far as how I reflect on my garden. Maybe it'll give you some ideas and you can come up with your own method. All right, if you're interested, just click on that video and I will meet you over there. I will see you all soon.